Robert Lucas, another Nobel Prize-winning economist, said about this topic, why do some countries grow fast and some not? He said, the consequences for human welfare involved in questions like this are simply staggering. Once one starts to think about it, it's hard to think about anything else. And that's also my view, actually. I think we have made a mistake over the last 50 years, quite a big mistake, in the way we think about development. We've been thinking about development as what happens when a large number of firms in an economy produce more output. Now, I'm going to suggest that development is better thought of as a characteristic of the system as a whole, not as the sum of what happens to a whole series of individual firms. This approach is not yet very well understood in economics, though it's actually very common in things like biology and physics. Now, what Acemoglu and Robinson say is that the reason why you have weak institutions in developing countries isn't because the rich and powerful people in that country are mistaken. The reason you have weak institutions is because the rich and powerful elites like it that way, that they are actually benefiting from having the economy structured as it is. So what they're saying is that the politics is what drives development. If you have a better political environment, then you'll have better institutions and better policies and all the rest of it. Now, I'm a bit torn about this book. I mean, I buy this idea that politics matters. That seems absolutely right. But there are times when the book seems like yet another example of a missing ingredient. You know, first we thought it was capital, then it was technology, then it was policies, then it was, what came after policies, institutions, now it's politics. Okay, now what I think is missing from this is the idea that all these things are endogenous characteristics of the system. And there are times when Acemoglu and Robinson seem to be saying that, but they don't quite say that explicitly. And that is what I want to say explicitly in the rest of this talk. So we've had a bit of a rush tour of 50 years of development policy, which we're going to summarize in 4 bullet points. Okay, write this down for your university courses. First, the critical point, we have made the fastest progress in history in poverty reduction in the last 50 years. Right? More people lifted out of poverty, bigger reductions in infant mortality, bigger reductions in malnutrition and hunger, more people getting access to improved water supplies than ever before. Some countries have made it in the last 50 years. This is hugely important. For all the failures of our economic models, something is working well. The second point is that we have no explanation for that. We have no explanation for why some countries have done well and some countries have not, at least not in our economic models. The third point is that we have constantly sought some missing ingredient that needs to be added into the mix. We can stir and we'll get economic growth. We're looking for the constraint. And the fourth conclusion is that every time we think we've identified the missing thing, it turns out to be endogenous. It turns out to be part of the system and not something that you can add from the outside. It's not some external ingredient. So the point I want to make is that our society and our economy are made up of a very large number of adaptive processes. People's habits and behaviors are adapting and changing. Anybody with teenage kids will know that they're busy texting their friends when they should be having dinner with you. Products are adapting, think of the bicycle. Firms, industries are adapting, and so too are institutions. But the important thing is that all these adaptive processes are not just adapting with each other. People are not just interacting with people, but they're adapting across this space. Now is a good time, it seems to me, to mention Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen, who is the Romanian economist I mentioned at the beginning. He was a professor of statistics here, I think, in the 1930s and 1940s. And he was a real pioneer in this idea of evolutionary economics. And his insight, which is really at the heart of all this stuff, is that economic systems are not like evolutionary systems. They are evolutionary systems. Okay? And it's a really important distinction. His major contribution on this was about the second law of thermodynamics, which we won't talk about now. But I think the important thing to recognize is his idea that economic systems, he criticized the idea that economic systems are in an equilibrium or converging on an equilibrium. And on that, he's looking more and more right, basically. He's looking as if he was very prescient. So if we think of development as an emergent property of a complex adaptive system, which is never in equilibrium, then we begin to have a model that begins to explain what we actually see in the world, begins to explain the problem that we've been trying to grapple with for the last 50 years. Looking back on what we've been doing for the last 50 years, it seems that we have assumed too readily that progress would be predictable, linear. We weren't really prepared for the shocks that we've had, the financial crisis, climate change. And we have never really had the tools to explain why some countries lift off and some countries don't. As the global system has become more interconnected, the fact that we are now beginning to understand the complexity of these economic and social systems, I hope will mean that we can find ways to intervene to help shape them in a way that's positive. But I hope it's clear from everything I've said that we need to address this task with a good degree of humility. We development economists have been wrong a lot in the past, and if this story of complex adaptive systems is true, then it's very difficult to predict how our interventions will change the systems we're working with. We can't engineer poverty reduction. We have to proceed in small steps. We have to experiment, learn, and adapt alongside all the other parts of the system that we're co-evolving with. Thanks very much.